question that you want. Not quite the same, but you'd ask amplification. Another one? And then what else is there? Whenever we have questions and answer sessions, I usually define the areas I'm not qualified really to handle at all. I could give you those, but I won't. There are about 6 areas that I'm just really unqualified to handle. But I can tell you the ones that I've done a lot of work on. A lot of people have thought more brilliantly than I have on some of these things, but I've thought very hard over them over the last 7 years. And I can at least give you if I know an answer at all, I'll give you one. And if I don't, I'll simply tell you. I won't make a Mickey Mousing up and say, listen, actually, it seems to me, this or that. There is an answer that I have that satisfied my heart, and then I'll give it to you. Okay? Are there questions on the questions for a start? Before you ask the questions, are there questions on asking questions? All right, and we're just going to do this for a short time, and then I want to get back into a major teaching area. We've spent a little time ago. We'll do a small revision of some of the stuff we've done in a little while, and then we'll get on to how he guides and directs men. Okay, questions. Let's handle them now. They can be anything from first night to preferably the theoretical ones, because the practical ones that we answer at night, it's too complicated. Most of the time I tell you do this and then this and then this. But if they're practical, ask them to. Okay? Who's going to start the ball rolling? Yes, sir. Yes. And the reason why they say that is because they don't believe in a God distinct from his creation. The base, this realization is a base. You don't, it's not really it works a couple of different ways depending on whichever facet of Eastern thinking. But sometimes it's just realize the God who is already there. It's a meditation awareness, an increase in awareness in what is already true. So that's alien, totally alien to the biblical philosophy. The biblical statement of what is actually right is that man is truly alienated from God. He's really cut off from him. And God is not actually in his life and present and ruling, and he's just not aware of it. In other words, to boil it down, the problem with man is not that he's just not wise enough to realize what is actually true. The problem is he's also disobedient. He has not been good. Now that's the sin problem, see? So this is kind of avoided. The whole past of all the righteousness, and that's kind of avoided. And the basis sort of this: if you increase your knowledge, you will be a better person in the future. But what do you do with the past? And the Bible deals very realistically with this. It says there was a real rebellion in space-time. Man has really fallen, and he's really wrong. And he needs not only to be more wise in the future, he needs to be restored to the God who he's been cut off from because of his selfishness, because of his rebellion. Yes, I know, and that's another big Buddhist thing, which is filtered, unfortunately, into Christian thinking, and which I'd like to annihilate now for you. You see, unfortunately, a large number of Christians have followed. There's a guy who contributed a great deal to garbagey thinking on this area. He was a good man. He had a messed up life when he got saved, and he was a very brilliant man. But I think he did the church great damage by introducing 2 philosophical concepts from his background. His name was St. Augustine. Augustine studied under a Persian philosopher by the name of Manet. Out of this guy came a number of other heresies, Manichaeanism and all these other weird things. But Manet was a Persian philosopher that had a synthesis of about 3 basic things: Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and some other thing. Gnosticism. Yeah, 3 different philosophies. He synthesized them. St. Augustine, before he became a Christian, was a very playboy-type dude. He was a real Hugh Hefner in his day, only worse. He had his own vomitarium and everything. Just the epitome of hedonism, gluttony and sexual licentiousness and the whole mess. And he really was a mess. He was a genuine mess. And then he got saved. God really shook him up and saved him. And he studied 9 years under this dude. For 9 solid years. Most people I know in the West have not studied half that length of time under any Eastern master. But Augustine studied 9 years under Manet. Yeah. For me. Who is it? Just take a message, tell him we'll call back. Dear long distance, I cannot leave the middle of my sermon to answer you. Mane, Augustine, when he got saved, he ripped off on some of Mane's errors. He pointed some of them out, said this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. But I think Augustine imported two ideas into the Christian framework. Augustine was one of the first guys who ever systematized in a body of writing what Christian thinking was, other than just reading the Bible. And based on his work, of course, John Calvin drew very heavily from Augustine's thought pattern, and then we get some things that I think have affected the church in the 20th century to some extent because of that. Here are two ideas that Augustine threw in. One of them was the duality of God was one of them. This idea that God was both good and evil at the same time was sort of stuck into Augustine's head, that, a perfect being would encompass both evil and good. That comes strongly out in John Calvin's writings, who just simply said God created good and God created evil. And then if you ask John Calvin why did he do that, John Calvin would have said because God had other attributes beside his mercy and his love. He had also justice and his anger and all this, and he wanted to show that he had those as well. So he made good and he made evil. Now that is Manichaeism. But it's stuck in Calvin's head, and it came through all these things. The other one is this: the concept that God is in the eternal now. That there is no past, present, or future to the Godhead. That's the second concept that Augustine introduced. Now, though Augustine ripped off on some of the other errors of Mane, the one thing he didn't rip off on was those two things. He left them in, and I really think they've affected Christians. It's very hard today to try and deal with the Eastern man, or it's hard to deal with even a rationalist sometimes because of those two importations into Christian thought framework. Let me explain what I'm talking about. In the duality concept, God has, let's say it like this, God has two heads. One head is love, the other head is justice. Do you see the kind of thing? And it's, sometimes he shows the love head and sometimes he shows the anger head. Do you see the kind of... It's this concept. And people, it's very hard for people to conceive of a two-headed God like that. Except in the East, it's easy because there's no absolute. You see, in the East, there's no real absolutes. There's no real right as opposed to a real wrong. In the East, you get this. You don't get right and wrong. That's kind of illusion. Yeah, let me take Krishna Consciousness, for instance, because I know a little bit more about Krishna Consciousness than some of the other trips that are at. In Krishna Consciousness, you not only can worship Lord Krishna by offering him flower garlands, you can also worship him by slicing your arms up. Because they're similar. They're both acts of worship. Now, in Christian thinking, that's horrible, see? It's a horrible thought because it means destruction of a valuable body that God has given you in order to worship a God who gave you that valuable body, which is horrible. And the scriptures come right against that and say, don't you know your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? And remember the priests of Baal who slashed themselves in the Old Testament? It's exactly that same principle. And no absolutes. No real rights and real wrongs. No absolutes. Let me explain this thing, no absolutes. Have you ever heard, this is an elephant here. It's a cool Pratney elephant. Grown up for many years in Picasso schools. There is a representation of an elephant. There were once three blind men who were introduced to an elephant who had never seen an elephant in their lives, and they never would because they were blind. One blind man grabbed the elephant's tail, one blind man grabbed the elephant's foot, and the other one grabbed his ear. And each one felt their respective bit of elephant and said, far out, wow, and three different things. And then the keeper took the elephant away, and then they all went home discussing this marvelous elephant that they touched. One of them said, that was the funniest creature I've ever seen, the elephant. It reminded me very much of a snake, kind of all thin and wriggly. And the guy said, what? Thin and wriggly? It was huge. I put my arm right around. I couldn't get my arm all the way around it. The guy said, you're mad. I had my finger around it. It was that small. And the third said, you guys never touched an elephant. You must have got something else. I got a real elephant. It was flat and like a palm leaf. And they argued for the rest of their lives. You never saw it. I did so see an elephant. You did not see an elephant. I did. Well, yours wasn't wriggly. It was so. I know what I felt, man. I think. And the point is this. They couldn't see the whole elephant. They can only see bits of it. And this is what is imported now in Eastern thinking, see? Nobody sees all truth. That's why everybody's right. Can you see the thing? You say Jesus is the only way to God, but you just got the elephant's tail, see? This other man says that Fubar is the way to God, see? And he's right too. You're all right. There you see, when nobody sees what absolute truth is, then who can be sure? Now, against this, the Bible comes and says that the God who is there knows absolute truth, and he's told us what absolutes are. In a simple, space-time way, he said, this is right, you walk in this way, as opposed to real wrong. Do you see the thing? Let me explain it like this. Here's the way Christians think. Here's a right, and here's its opposite. Therefore, the opposite is a wrong. So you get this. Like that. See that? Here's Eastern thinking. Two real opposites. Now that's the difference. That's why so many kids say, well, that's your opinion. And it's right for you. And what I'm doing is exactly opposite of what you're doing, but it's right for me too, and we're both right. If we only saw all truth, we'd know we were all right. And the Bible says God does see all truth, and not all things are beautiful in their own way. There are some real rights and some real wrongs. And that's why Christians have to... See, and people accuse Christians of being prejudiced because of that. They say, well, you're just biased. We'll have anybody, you know. I mean, we accept anybody or everybody. How come you Christians just say Jesus is the only way? What a prejudiced thing that is. But you see, practically Christians believe in good and evil. And Eastern people practically don't live like that. You can say, there is no such thing as good or evil. And then be very careful not to stand on something and get bitten by a snake. Or to tut-tut-tut when you see starving kids in the street. That's not practically living your philosophy. Do you see what I'm saying? If you really don't believe there's a difference between, an absolute difference between right and wrong, then you better live like that. And what kind of life is that? And if you don't live by it, you're hypocritical. And Christians say not only is there an absolute difference theoretically, there's an absolute difference practically. And Christians are to live right as opposed to living wrong. And so that means as Christians, we're going to stand in a world that says everything is beautiful in its own way and say, no, it is not. There are some horrible things. And the reason why there's some horrible things is not because God is both the devil and God at the same time. It's because there's been some real rebellion in the universe. And some real rights have been opposed and made wrong. Do you understand? How many understand this? In other words, it is not prejudice to say that if you walk off the top of a 30-story building, you will go down and spatter when you hit the ground. That is not prejudice. It's a statement of fact, see? And the simple guy says, I do not believe that. Then you simply take him up to the top of the roof and let him test his theory. And for Christians, the Christians say to me, how do you witness to a Buddhist who doesn't believe there's a difference between an absolute right and absolute wrong? I'd say, I just pick up a pot of hot coffee and hold it over his head. And say, he says, what do you do? I say, there is no difference between pain and non-pain, and pour it all over his head. I remember a girl once, she had this philosophy, nothing's real unless you create it in your own mind. In other words, the whole world is an extension of my own individual being. You're only there because I think you are. If I thought you weren't, you wouldn't be. You know? The tree falls in the forest, and nobody hears it, it doesn't make a sound. In other words, there's only reality in your own subjective experience. You haven't even heard that thing. Okay? Now, what do you do with that? I had a girl come up to me. She pointed to a piano. She said, what is that? I said, it's a piano. I said, no, it isn't. She said, no, it isn't. It's a blue giraffe. I looked at the blue giraffe at some length. It wasn't eating any grass or anything, as far as I could see. I went over and played chopsticks on it, which is the only tune I know, and not very well. And I said, well, it sounds like a piano to me. She said, well, that just sounds like a piano to you, because you think it's a piano. To me, it sounds like a blue giraffe eating grass. And what do you do, see? So you're mad, you know, demon-possessed, out, you know. She may have been both of those things. But the point is that she's trying to live, practically, as if there's no reality except her own consciousness. That does lead out to madness very rapidly when you reject external reality. What I'm trying to say is this. God has designed your being and the world around you, so there's only one way it fits, and that's in Him. If you reject anything He says about you or about the world around you, you'll fall apart in one way or another and live hypocritically. So what did I do? I said, then you're saying there's nothing real except as you want it to be. She said, that's right. There's nothing real except what I think it is. Now that's very convenient if you've done some rotten things. Then you simply say, I have not done them, and hope they go away. But they don't. They're real space-time things that have affected history and affected her life. So I looked at this girl, and I grabbed a pot of coffee, lifted up, she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to pour this all over your head, but it's all right, you don't have to worry, because you don't have to even think it's there. I happen to think it'll burn you. She looked at me, I said, let's go to the top of this building. She said, why? I said, I want you to think there's a swimming pool down there. I'm going to push you up. I happen to think you'll land on the pavement, and you'll hit so hard they'll have to paste over the top of you, but you didn't think it's a swimming pool. We're both going in for a swim. She looked at me. Then I grabbed her nose. And I reached right up, I grabbed him, I like, boom. And this is a very concrete thing when you grab somebody's nose. You know, it's a very practical, it gets out of the realm of theory and the reality thing. Grabbed the nose, and she said, well, I got my nose. I said, I haven't got your nose. You just think I've got your nose. What I'm trying to do is push the reality of the external world in on her subjective make-believe world. Do you see that? Kid is sitting meditating for three hours. There's a bird whistling outside, see? And I went to this place. I said, I know what you're doing now. He said, yeah, there's no bird outside there. And after I finished, he said, I can still hear this stupid bird. See? Because, in other words, it's a beautiful thing. God has designed a vast universe. Now just consider a man who doesn't know anything. He comes to consciousness on a desert island as a full-grown, fully mature person. Not a child, but he's never seen anything. He's Adam, let's say. I'm going to do a little media film one time, just do a parable of, you know, a guy wakes up and he looks around. The first thing he looks at is himself. See, man is unique. You look at kittens when they're newborn, they don't start checking out, what is this, you know, checking their whiskers and stuff. They don't do that. They just fool around and play in the sun. When a baby is born, starts checking himself, he looks at his hands like, what is this? What are these things? See, and, you know, he's always curious as anything, grabbing things, you know, listening to them, smelling them. He finds everything he can about his world. Very unique, see. Here's a man. The first thing he comes to this conclusion, he says, who am I? What am, you know, who am I? What kind of thing am I? That's the question he asks. Who am I? Whatever philosophy you're into, whatever religion, you're going to have to answer that question somehow. And the gospel is the only basic faith that gives you a real answer for starting where everybody's got to start, with yourself. It tells you why you can start with yourself. It says you're a person. It gives you a reason for being a person. It says that you're not a cosmic blob, that you're not gas, and you're not nothingness. You've come out of another person has made you. That's why you're a person. So straight away you have an answer for why you feel like a person, because you've been made by a person. Now think of a dude, he thinks he crawled out of a cloud of cosmic gas X billion light years ago. And away. How does he feel? He feels, here's a Marxist scientist, for instance, and he loves this girl, and he's a biochemist and a biologist, and he doesn't believe that there's a real creator, let's say this. And he's got this girlfriend he likes very much. He hangs up his lab coat, and then he goes out, and his girlfriend gives him a big schmecky kiss, and he has to say to himself, the feelings I feel are chemical reactions. They have no validity at all. They do not mean anything. They're valueless, and his chemical reactions say, you are a liar. You know? What does love mean? What does beauty mean? What does all this mean if you come from chaos? It doesn't mean anything. But look, to answer this question, he can simply say, I'm a person. And when he says and feels that he's a person, he's got to answer this question, why am I a person? And the Bible immediately answers it, because a person made you. Behind the universe is a person, a real person. That's one whole half of the story. The next question he asks is, where am I? What am I doing here? Why am I here, if you like? Or where am I? And then he starts looking. He checks out his island. He sees a vast sea, and then he sees the stars come out at night, and maybe he sees a meteor falling. And the more he studies, the bigger he knows the world is. And then he asks this question. If somebody put me here, and somebody made the rest of this, what kind of person is that to make this large a thing? And the second thing he comes to is there is a person here, and he was the one who put all this together. He's a lot bigger than I am. And that's a second natural revelation. He gets the second thing, looking at the world around him, and he sees the vastness of the thing, and the second thing he starts thinking about is how big. And as a matter of fact, The Apostle Paul uses these two things in Acts 17 to show people how foolish it is to worship pieces of stone. You watch his argument. Let's look at Acts 17. We've got a little bit off eternal now, but we'll come back to it. Anyway. Besides, this is free. This doesn't cost you anymore. This is more precious than rubies and all your... All right? Acts 17. Here's Paul, Mars Hill, all right? Here you are. I stood on Mars Hill. It's really a far-out thing, man, to be on Mars Hill, because it's still there today, the same Mars Hill. Matter of fact, they restored the marketplace and bits and pieces of it, where Paul actually preached, and you can still see the ruins of some of the religious temples around it. It's really a wild thing to sit on that hill and to read there and to know that a couple of thousand years ago, the Apostle Paul stood on the same hill and preached. The people that had, now just departed long since from the scene. And then, put yourself, here he is, he's arrived. He's down in the marketplace, and all these dudes, they sit around all day. They're real hip kids, they're discussing all the cool things that are going on, all the latest philosophies that are, have you heard about certain, oh, far, what is that, and they're all sitting around the marketplace. And Paul comes up and he says, what are you talking about, And then he starts talking about Jesus, and they say, this is a weird thing, I never heard this one before. Why don't you come and tell us about it? And come to our society of philosophers. We meet up on top of Mars Hill, So Paul goes out there and he says, okay, listen, I'm going to tell you something. Men of Athens, I see you're very religious. You really are. I see all these statues around to all these various gods. The fat one over here saying, squat if you love Buddha was a little sign in there. There's all these different things underneath it. There's all these different signs and things. But as I went past, he said, I saw one of your things, and the interesting thing it said on it was, to the unknown God. Now that God, whom you ignorantly worship, I want to talk to you about him. So they say, wow, I always wondered what that statue was. We never knew anything. Tell us on it. See, he goes in along their line. And then he says this, and he really blows their heads. And he's speaking now to university graduates. Do you see what I'm saying? A lot of times Paul just talks to ordinary old pagans along the road, but these are dudes who, their whole thing was just fooling around with words and philosophy. You should know then how a Christian handles this kind of situation. See? And this is what he gets up and he says. He says, this God that you're ignorantly aware of, I want to talk to you about him. And then immediately he shifts. He shifts out of that little block and he shifts right into the space-time universe. And he goes like this. God who made the world and all things that are in. See, he lifts them out of that little block of granite to the whole universe. And he says, check out how big this God is. First thing he does, infinite. He's infinite. That's where we started yesterday. And he says this, God who made the world and all things therein, seeing he's Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in houses made with man's hands. It's places of worship, temples. Neither is worship with man's hands as though he needed anything. Gives to all men life, breath. He is the sustainer. He upholds the whole universe. He made the whole thing. And as they're listening to this, they say, this is kind of stupid to have a temple for God if he made the whole thing. It is stupid, really, when you come to think of it. He hasn't said that yet. He just said, he doesn't need that, because look, he made all this. They go, far around. That's true, see? He hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell, that they should seek the Lord. They might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. And then he's given them a dig, see? He's saying, why? He's not far away, this God. He holds the whole universe together. He fills it all. You're walking through him, as certain of your own rock preachers are saying, in whom we live and move, And he quotes a couple of Greek poets around in those days. See? Certain of your poets said, we are his offspring, and he dragged it in. And he says this, see? For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that God is like unto little weeny graven pieces of rock. And he's saying this, look at this rock. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't smell, it doesn't hear, it doesn't walk. And you made that piece of rock. You chipped it out. That rock is less than you are. Why worship it? And they're looking at it and saying, that is stupid, really. I'm a greater person than the God I'm worshiping. That is dumb. What am I doing that for, see? And he's taken the personal now. He jumps right from the infinite. He comes back to the personal. Certainly your poet said that we are also of his offspring. Now, if you the offspring of God, then you must know he's a person. And he's much more than this rock. And he's kind of saying, the question underneath is, isn't this stupid? He's never said it. He just, you obviously know this. And he's appealing to, he's simply telling them, man, think it out. What are you doing? What are you worshiping this chunk of rock for? This is not where it's at. You're much more beautiful than this piece of rock. And then he comes and he says this. We ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by a heart in man's device. Times of this ignorance, this God you've ignorantly worshipped, he winked at. See? But now, he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he's appointed a day. In other words, your foolishness has cut you off from this God. Why worship all this other ridiculous stuff when the God, the unknown God, is there? And that means repentance. That means change your way of thinking, change your way of living. God has appointed a day in which he will judge us. And then he talked about Jesus and the resurrection. I've heard some people say, now if the Apostle Paul hadn't gone into philosophy here, we'd have had a lot more converts. He should have preached nothing but Christ. What do you think he was doing? And I think most people who say that have never been in a university. I have a lot of times. If you can get a bunch of converts like Paul did, first time in a university, you're really where it's at, brother. And the marvelous thing to me is that some believed after he said it. First time. Some believed. Some mocked. Some doubted. Some said, well, we'll see you again later on. And that's Paul's approach. Same thing. Personal is infinite. He's bigger than the whole universe, so he doesn't need anything from you. See? He's a person, so it's foolishness for you to make gods of lesser things than himself. And that infinite person has a right on your life, and if you refuse him that right, there's going to be a day when you'll have to stand before him and give an account of your stupidity. He's going to only ask you some intelligent questions, and you do give us some intelligent answers. Do you see the thing? So the person that says Christianity is not intellectually respectable, it's some kind of crutch. Jesus is a crutch. You should say to him, I'll take two then, if you can find another Jesus. Is that? Give me a wheelchair. Yeah. Now let's come back to eternal now. Here's Augustine's contribution, which I think messed up a lot of people. That's what we're going to challenge right now, eternal now. It is important for you to see this. Everybody hold your hand up. Flex it. That's part of your being. Your being, all right? Your being. Now this hand is just part of Winkie Pratney's being. It's not my personality. It's not my morality. It's just my hand. It's not a good hand. It's not a bad hand. It's just a hunk of hand connected to the rest of me. Do you see that? In other words, I have a being, and then I have a personality. My personality is distinct from my being, not separated from. I don't have a Winkie Pratney floating out here, you know, that occasionally says to my body, do this, and I go, the body goes, you know, and does its thing. They're together, and yet they're distinct. Do you see that? Here's my hand lying down there. It has certain automatic reflex actions that keep my heart going and my, you know, all of this. I don't have to think, breathe. Oh, you know, because I'd be scared to go to sleep. Man. Oh, my heart stopped. I forgot to tell her to keep going. Certain automatic functions in my being. But my personality controls my being. Now, this hand is not good or evil. This same hand, see? Same hand can it can kill you. See, that same hand. And the thing is, the being is controlled by the personality. And there's a distinction between the two. Now, I think that's where Augustine made his miss. When we talk about God's being, what is the one thing we said about God's being that makes him unique? Beyond that? Right, and that means what? He's infinite. Now why? Yeah, who said that? Creator. He's uncreated, that's why. Here's the one thing we can say about God's being. It's uncreated. That's a unique thing. And remember I said right at the start, I said, some of you say, why was I born? You know, I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be here. You know, why? All of those things. Have you ever thought God didn't ask to be here either? He's always been. He didn't have a choice either. Have you ever thought about that? You were created. You were born. But God has never been created, never been born. He's always been here. He's just got to simply put up with who he is. He didn't say, I have decided to be. He has always been. And he had no say over it. Do you see that? God has no say over who he is. He has always been that. That's just he's stuck with who he is, and you're stuck with who you are. So we both got problems. God's being is uncreated. Therefore, he is infinite. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about being, we talk about eternity. That means what? No beginning, no end. That's infinity. See that? Infinite, when we say infinite, we say God had no start to him and no end to him. Now that's what I call an area of wonder. I can't explain that to you because there's simply no possible illustration I can use that approaches it. Everything I look at is created. Everything you're looking at is created. The seat you're sitting on one time wasn't a seat. It was a piece of wood. And before that it was a tree. And before the tree it was a seed. And before that you go all the way back to the time when it began. And before that what? God. Do you see? You come back to a place in time when there was nothing except God himself. And you can't go back any further in God's being because as far back as you go, he's always been. And as far forward as you go, he will always be. And that's his problem. Now, I can give you a small illustration, but it's not even a good illustration. It's the best one I got. There was a program used to be called the Twilight Zone. I don't know whether you ever had it in Canada. Did you ever have it in Canada? Twilight Zone? All right. In it, one day there was a dude who made spectacles. And he made this weird pair of spectacles with just some particular kind of quartz crystal that he had just for fun. When he made it, he saw to his absolute amazement that in the room in which he was in, there were these two-dimensional creatures. And the weird thing is that these creatures only existed in two dimensions. They had no third dimension. They turned around sideways, they vanished. They had no breadth. See? They had height. They had height and they had width, but they had no thickness. They had no, here's the point of the arrow pointing out towards us. They had no out here. Do you see that? That's a weird thing, isn't it? They had this way and this way, but nothing out this way. So if they turned sideways, they vanished because there actually was no thickness. Now that's not too hard for us to imagine. It is a little hard. You can make a two-sided figure. You want to do it. Get a strip of paper like this, rip it, a long strip like this, roll it toilet paper if you like, get a long strip, put one twist in it, and then tape the ends together, and you get a Möbius strip. Then cut down the middle of it, or take a, when you got your strip, and I'm not going to even try to draw it, it's got a twist on it like this. Then take your pencil and run it around the inside of the thing, and just keep running it, and you'll find that the pencil crosses over and goes right around the whole thing twice without you taking off the pencil. It's only got one side on it. One continuous side. It goes inside and then outside without you taking your pencil off once. And if you cut that strip down the middle, snip, 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 all the way around, guess what you get? With a normal three-sided figure, you get two separate rings. With this one, you drop it and you get just one big ring. Now try it. You sometimes believe me, right? Well, it works. You just try it. That's a one-sided figure. It's easiest for us to understand a one-sided figure, figure with just two dimensions than it is to understand a different figure. Now, here's his character here. He doesn't know what this is out here. He's never, no concept. Here he is and he's alive and he's on this blackboard and he's running backwards and forwards and jumping up and down, but he's not jumping out because there is no out to him at all. He's got no concept of what out means. Now watch, I'm going to do a miracle for this little dude. He's looking over here. Weep, weep. Just created a bird, see? Now his head is just blown completely. Now, he just has no idea. How did that bird get? How? See, he saw the bird appear. He saw it appear this way and this way. But it came out of nothing. Where did it come? See, now he's freaking out because he doesn't know where that bird came from. Now he's watching really careful. I'm going to do it again. Now he just doesn't understand that. There's no way he can even see. The reason why he doesn't understand is because he has no concept of out. So he can't even see how the bird got there in the first place. To him, That out is coming out of nothing. He just doesn't see. It's just coming out of nowhere, of nothing. Now, extrapolate that out for us. Here we are, three-dimensional people living, let's say, a fourth dimension of time. Now push it out further, and you come to God, uncreated, who just steps in and goes, I'll make a man. Weep. And the man goes, huh? That is impossible. That has upset every theory we've ever... Do you see that? The limits of his problem is the limits of his universe. He only knows and can relate with things that are created. He can't relate to uncreated because there's no comparison. There's only one illustration I can give you of the word uncreated, and it's in your own being. And there's great amount of attack being made on it today. It is your choice. I believe this is a personal theory of mine. I give it to you because it's answered so many questions. I believe when God created you, he gave you the power to create something else, and it's a choice. And every time you make a decision, it flows uncreated, created by yourself, right out of your own being. In other words, your choice does not exist until you make it. Now, that's the only parallel I can give you to God's uncreated being. Do you see the thing? The only parallel I can give you is of God creating something out of himself is you making a choice. That's the only parallel I can give you. Anyway, I'll come back to that. This is a little freaky. All right? Do you understand that? Do you understand that? Roughly? Okay, God has a being, and that is eternal. The characteristic of this being, uncreated. Here's a philosophical category. Form. What is it that gives form to the universe? God's uncreated being. That's the basis. What is the basis of everything that is there? The form is God. God's being. God who is there, Francis Schaeffer would say. I rubbed off what I shouldn't have. Now look. When we say God is uncreated and we say he's eternal, this is where I think Augustine made his mistake now. Augustine said, because God is eternal and uncreated, his personality has no sequence in it. God never does anything after another thing. See the mistake he made? Augustine said this, God is uncreated, his being is infinite, he's eternal. Therefore, past, present, and future are all the same to God. Now try and handle that thing in your head. Well, this is what he said. That the past and the present and the future all exist simultaneously with God. Think about that. In other words, what God is now doing, he has already done. What he has already done, he is now doing. What he has already done, he will be doing. What he will be doing, he has already done. What he will be doing, he is now doing. What he is now doing, he will be doing. Now see if you can handle that. Yes? Yes? The law of love, which is the basis of the commandment, is not a law that God made. It is a law which is intrinsically true about his own being. I'll give you that in a second. That's a very good distinction. That's a very important one. To answer this question, is God selfish when he says, love me first, as the basis of all right and wrong in the universe? Yes, is there such a thing? And we'll come back to that. That's a good question. Yes, down the back. A better translation of that, King James, would be Erasmus's translation, which is original bringer forth of all creation. He's not referring to Christ being the one who is firstborn in the sense of being a created being, but the one who first bore the whole creation, who first brought it forth. Christ in Colossians is shown and demonstrated, as he is in John 1:1, to be the one by whom the whole universe was first created. So just scribble down in your margin. A better translation is original bringer forth. And I used that, I think, yesterday. when I was going through Colossians for you, I mentioned that as a quick aside, like in Shakespearean tragedy, aside. Original bringeth forth. Yeah, that's Erasmus's translation, yeah. See, when one of the rules of Scripture is to take the context to give you the meaning of the word as used in its thing. In other words, you know, I could say love. I love cookies, I love my mother, I love my dog, I love my wife. And depending on the word that I use afterwards or before can modify the word love. That's just in English. And the same thing is true in all languages. To understand the intent of the writer, you have to do contextual analysis. You've got to look at the rest of the verses around it to see why that particular word is used and what particular shading of meaning you should give among the available shading of meanings that men used in their day. Language is always a flexible thing, see? And when people use one word, they can use it in 4 or 5 different meanings and shades. Not radically different, but allied and close. And you can say, see, I could say, I have borne my sorrows in the heat of the day. Now, if I just say, I have borne my sorrows, and you didn't know anything about English, you might think, do you mean that he gave birth to a baby sorrow? Do you see? Or I could mean I carried it. It was something, do you see? And it's just, I've used the same word. But you've got to see the context of the way I said it in order to understand what I really meant when I used that one single word, born. And the same is true here. The original, when he is firstborn of all creation, the actual Greek structure doesn't go like that. That's King James translation. A good thing to do is to look at 3 or 4 other translations. What does that say? Yeah, the Amplified doesn't amplify the born. Amplified's a good translation, but it doesn't amplify often where it should amplify. I'd go through a bunch of different translations. I'll give you that one, which to me sounds the most accurate, because another thing too, when you're looking at a single verse, look at every verse in the Bible that has to do with Christ concerning that issue, and then you get a modification from the whole of the Bible. In other words, if some people read the Bible, if some people read Goldilocks and the 3 Little Bears, the way they read the Bible, they never understand that story either. Because you have to read everything, the whole thing, to get the meaning of one thing. You know, you study a play or something at school. First they have you read it through once, then you do a report on it, then you do a breakdown on it, then you take one scene, and then you take one phrase. And then when you've seen the whole thing and fooled around with that long enough, then you can give the significance of a phrase and who wrote it, and that kind of thing. It's a similar problem, but that's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. I think classic theological definition of that would be Christ is begotten, not made, not created. He's begotten. He comes, proceeds forth from the Father is the way the early fathers defined it. He is eternally proceeds forth from the Father. He is the Son, the Father, but he is not created by the Father, and he did not need a human mother or a divine mother in order to be there. That's the simplest way. Yes, sir. Who? No. Hear me now, is that right? I don't know. So I define a little further. You can tell me whether that's what I'm talking about. Well, that's existential. Yeah, that's simple existential application. In existential, you've got the 2 major tenets of your philosophy, that the only important thing is the now, the knife edge of time, and then it's history there. I will never. See that now? Just what happens. I never will, but I will, and I have, and I am, and I shall be, and I already have, and I am at now. See, it's foolishness. You destroy the whole... You might as well throw the Bible out when you do that. Read on. Genesis 22. I'll give you one last one. You can go right to the Bible. If you want to find out what the Bible has to say about sequence, then read the Bible. The whole thing. I'm just taking verses here and there. Genesis 18. 22, rather. Verse 1. Read it out. God did what? It's a funny thing to do. Why? Why does God test anything? You just made a Christian statement that would have blown Augustine's head. To see what is in our hearts. She quoted the scriptures too, by the way, only not that particular one. God said the same to the nation of Israel. Send you into the wilderness to see what is in your hearts, to prove you whether you will obey my commandments or not. And that's straight gospel statement. Now, here's the interesting thing. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord called to him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. Verse 12. Verse 12. Somebody read that out. For what? For now I know. Now what does that mean? That means time. Point choice. Now look, I've defined the second half of this for you on the board. God's being, uncreated, lives in eternity. God's personality operates in endless time, which means sequence, not light, not our concept. Our concept of time is just light, you know. Light, space-time, that's our concept of time. But I'm not defining time like that. I'm defining it as sequence of creation. There was a time, when something happened. Then another thing happened, and in between that is a passage of time, sequence. I say this, God's being lives in eternity. His personality operates in endless sequence. No end to it. But there is creation all the way along. And that's an area of wonder, his uncreatedness, and the area of wonder, the fact that he's a creator is another area of wonder. You just take your hat off and worship there. You can't explain that. Now what does prayer mean? Prayer is a beautiful thing. When God made you, he gave you the ability to create, sure. So this is exciting for me. Here is God, the Father, with his total control of the universe, but the people he's made have the ability to create themselves, and therefore they have the ability to violate values. So where did evil come from? It came from a creative choice against that which is of highest value. Satan originated evil. It was created. God did not. When he gave man or any creature the ability to create, making him in little likeness to himself, having free choice, he gave him the ability to originate. And when you can originate wrong as well as right, depending on whether you conform to which is highest value or not. Therefore, evil came into the universe by a creative space-time choice, by a creation of God. Something that God created to be a creator in its own little way. Do you see that? So God did not originate it himself. He simply originated the creation, which in turn created. Now what does prayer mean? Have you ever wondered why you ought to pray anyway? Well, it's a beautiful thing. It means this. Every time I pray, I am making something creative that never existed in the universe before I made it. So when I stand before the Lord and I say, Father, hear me now, something goes up into the universe that just exists then. Now people will freak out, see? See? As you make a choice now, it goes right into the universe, and it did not exist before. Possibility, probably yes, but not actuality. And God hears. Creative God, see? He hears and he listens and he answers. So what you have is a flow of choices coming up, and God actively, not like a great programmer. This is a movie film I've seen 9 million times. See, not that. That's Eastern, see? But a person who listens and says, what? See? And you see this in the Bible. God gets excited when a sinner gets saved. See? The whole of heaven rejoices. See, that's beautiful. Can you see this? Real choices, really affecting God. Now do you see why you should pray? It's important to. In other words, when you pray, you make it possible for God to do various things that before was not wise for him to do, because it simply was not, if you like, the base to do it with. Here's a classic illustration. Jonah. Jonah is a classical. What did God say to Jonah? You get there and you preach 40 days and they're going to be wiped out. So Jonah goes, all right, finally after a voyage to hell in the bottom of a whale. And then he goes and he preaches. Everybody repents. You know what they said? You look at it. Jonah. Quick flash over to Jonah. If you can find Jonah, it's a very sneaky prophet hidden way there. Very hard to find indeed. Page 737. Between Micah and Obadiah and Amos and Joel, keep going on from Daniel, you'll come to Joel, then Amos, and then you come to Jonah. All right? If you come to Micah or to Habakkuk or Haggai or Zechariah, you come too far. Jonah chapter 3. Listen to what these heathen knew who had never been exposed to money. Verse 8, let every man and beast be covered with sackcloth. This is Jonah 3, verse 8. Let him turn everyone from his evil way. There's creative choice, see? From the violence, they had a violence revolution that was in their hands. Who can tell if God will turn and repent and turn away from his fierce anger that we perish not? Now get the next verse and underline it. And God saw their works, that they turned from their evil way. And God repented of the evil that he had said he would do unto them. And he did it not. Now that's a heavy scripture. Do you see why it's important for you to witness? You're not just actors on a stage that is being puppeted around by the great God. You are active agents, creating for Jesus Christ or against him. And you can fellowship and work with the great God and be his ambassador to turn men and women to righteousness. And every time you pray, you create something. It goes into the universe. Every time you sin, you create something that goes into the universe. And that's why God can be hurt and can be glad and can say he's going to do something and then certain things take place and him not do it. That's another reason why very few prophecies in the Bible have times given to them. Have you ever noticed that? The few prophecies in the Bible that have times assigned to them are ones concerning the Godhead, where they've decided what they're going to do. But there's very, very few prophecies in the Bible where God ever says after a certain amount of time, a man will do such and such a thing, see? Matter of fact, the only few times, one of them was Jonah, 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. It wasn't because of repentance. The other time was the children of Israel were going to be sent 400 years into the wilderness to wander, and it was more like 430 years. But, you know, those of you scientists, you're familiar with, you know, decimal. You only have a limit of accuracy. See that? If you want to say, what is the speed of light? You say 186,000 miles a second, but it's a lot different if you're trying to calibrate. See, you say, well, that's point, beep, 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 and you put 15 decimal points. God says 400 years. They're in there about 400 years. They're closer to 400 years than they are to 500 or 300. You see that? But it's not this. All right, starting from this, got 15 seconds, and your Exodus begins. And then exactly 400 years later, the last tick of the second, you know, then suddenly they all go, wow, into the promised land, and they're there on the other side, just as the sweep second cross. See, that's ridiculous. And that's why I'm always very suspicious of people who give prophecies. California will fall off into the ocean the 14th of July, 1972. Oh, really? I know this, that God has reversed prophecy. And he says he will. If that nation against whom I pronounce judgment shall turn from their evil ways, then I will reverse the judgment. If that nation against whom I've given blessing shall turn away from their righteousness, then I will judge them. And God says, I'm fair, am I? You go, right on. Now, do you see that? Now, the world around you is saying this. Man is determined. The reason why you got green eyes is because your mother was scared by a pool table. That's, you know. That's the reason, see? And your environment, or your feeding, or your breeding, or all of these other things. Skinner is a horrible person here. B.F. Skinner, not Tom Skinner, the black evangelical, but B.F. Skinner, Skinner with his beyond dignity and freedom. And he rubbishes freedom, and he rubbishes dignity, and he rubbishes morality, and he rubbishes responsibility, and he says, you're just a bag of chemicals, and that's all. Nothing else. You no soul, no spirit, no life after death. You're just chemicals. And everything you do is because a result of an environmental reaction. God comes right against that, and he says, no, you're responsible because you've got the power to choose. And that's what he says. I set before you today life and death. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Now, does that clear up some things for you? Not, I haven't explored the vast implications, but do you see the importance of witness, the importance of prayer, the reason why man is responsible, the reason why there can be real wrong in the universe and God did not create it? And I think these are my two areas of wonder. Now, you may disagree, you may have other ones, but these are the simplest. I think there are some things we'll never be able to explain about God, but I think we should find the basic things and not just be content by saying, well, there's a bunch of things I can't explain about God. If you take that to its end degree, you say, well, I don't know anything about God and I can't explain anything, but he's really far out and you should try him even though I don't know what it is. You should dig until you've explained at least all that God will let you explain, or all that you can explain. And then when you hit an area where you can't, you just take your hat off and worship and say, praise the Lord. There's my taking my hat off and worship. Uncreated. Unity and diversity, the Godhead. I understand that. I cannot explain to you that. I can't explain to you what uncreated means, and neither can I explain what creation is, nor what a creator is, what a creative act is like. I can tell you this. It's there, and I accept it as a base. What's the opposite of form? Not quite. Just about. They're complementary opposites, not radical opposites. Freedom. Form and freedom. That which gives law without turning into a dictatorship, this which gives freedom without turning into a greasy grace trip. The basis of law is God's own being. The basis of freedom is his personality. He's a creator, that gives freedom. So are you. You have creative choice, therefore you're free to make choices. His uncreated being gives a base for law. Matter of fact, because God's personality is distinct from his being, God can be good. Because the law that he has to obey is his own being. That's the most valuable thing in the universe. God unselfishly chooses what he sees as the most valuable thing in the universe, and it turns out to be himself. So when he says, I am good, he knows what he's talking about. It's not just words, it's real. He's checked out everything there is. He knows he's got to wisely choose what is best. He checks out everything in the universe, and he comes back and he says, my own being is the most valuable thing there is. So he unselfishly chooses his own highest good. And then he must tell all other creatures who don't understand what the best thing in the universe is. And he tells you, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's why he says, you be holy, for I am. He says, you do what I'm doing. I'm doing what's best. I'm choosing what is best, and I've found out what it is. It's my own being. Now you do the same thing. What's that? Not really in the sense of growing up. God is a creator, though, which means he's not a divine repository. He's not a divine library. He's a creator, which means after everything that is possible to be invented is invented, he can invent a whole bunch of new things and create whole new galaxies and new space-time frameworks to play around in those. See? Yeah, but they were not imperfections when he made them. Yeah, they're part and parcel of... See, when you give a person creative power, it gives them the ability to love. It also gives them the ability to be selfish. And there's no way around that. It's the same way as having a kid. He could be Al Capone, he could be Billy Graham. You never know. You do your best for him, see? A little earlier than they do that, actually, a baby puts his finger on something hot and goes, ow! You know, mother doesn't say, that is hot. The kid learns by damage to my being, see? And the basis of the right and wrong is an evaluation of what is most valuable in the circumstance. The first thing a kid learns is by very simple practice. The mother looks and goes, when she doesn't want, the kid goes, that doesn't look very pleasant, see? So it learns by association that way. Now, mother can step in her head and say, don't touch that because it'll burn you. The kid wants to find out by experiment, and then he learns the hard way, see? You can learn by education, you can also learn by experience. And God has designed his law so that people learn both ways. His original design was that the parents should teach the children what is really right and really wrong, so that when they come into moral consciousness and begin to see real values, their education fits with their experience. What has happened is parents have brought their kids up with garbage, and their experience doesn't fit in with what they've said, and you fill in the blanks. My parents are hypocrites. See, that's the most cardinal sin. A kid can be immoral, can be anything, but he can't be a hypocrite, not in this generation. Where does this dichotomy, this split in their head come from? Of being, see, that value. We can come back further into value stage later, but that's a good question. Yes, Uncle, first and then you. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I never got quite to understand why you
Oh, I think you should just look here. It's a very simple thing. Yeah, the question was this. God saw that the imagination of man's thought was only evil continually. And the other thing is, which of you, by taking thought, could add 1 cubit to his stature? There's two things. One concerns the personality of man. This is what is evil. Body isn't. Body is amoral. See? Jesus is talking here, which one of you has control over your being so much so that by thought you can actually modify your height or your fatness or your pimples or anything else? See? And then, and this other thing, he's talking about personality. Man's personality has become twisted and corrupted and deviated away from God's pattern of perfection. Now, we're going to come on later to sin, and we'll go into the relationship between those. Yeah. You guys are always trying to run before you got the goodies. You got to get your walking shoes first. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does he deal with a 6-month-old baby that can't think yet that gets here? Well, you can. There can be some very real things. There's also some very real miracles from God. How do you deal with a little kid whose eyes are crooked like this and doesn't even understand words yet? And when prayed for by a servant of God, eyes straightened. The baby doesn't even know what's happening. Now, how do you handle that? The baby had, it thought that its eyes should straighten, therefore it did. See? That's a simple trick. Yeah, the rope. I did that. I did 4 years of magic. That's a simple trick, yeah. Yeah, the old Indian rope trick, yeah. That's a fake trick. That's not even a spirit, you know. That's not even a demonic thing. That's a just plain, simple, old fake trick. And one of the simplest ones. I'm not going to tell you that, whatever. The old Indian rope trick, yeah. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. There's a brotherhood. We never reveal all our secrets. Yeah, admittedly, it was a secret for a long time. Yes, I did. I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, I could tell you afterwards, but I don't want to. The trick is this. It takes various forms, but essentially this guy takes a rope, which is weighted on the end usually, you know, to get it up, and he throws it up in the air a number of times. And this usually happens at night time around the fireside, and a lot of chanting in there. Here's basic formula. He throws it up. Various chants and things go on. And then he throws it up, and it stays up. It just stays up there, man. It just hangs up there. And then he calls a little kid in a turban and a loincloth who climbs up the rope, goes right up, vanishes up the top. The dude goes up there and he vanishes. Then in one of the more gory versions of the trick, the magician climbs up after him. The rope's still hanging there in the air. The magician goes up, you hear some cries and some screams. Some parts of a body drops down. Legs and head and torso fall down on the ground. The magician's sidekicks run around with a big old basket and collect up all the things and throw them in. Down comes the magician again, stands over the basket like this, and then pulls the top off, and the kid climbs up together again, reassembled, and the rope falls down. That's the trick, But it's got all kinds of versions and stuff. Listen, I didn't come here to discuss the Indian rope trick. Yeah. Oh, yeah, tested, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right. But here's the thing I'd like to point out. There's a verse in James that says, God cannot be tempted. See? Do you know why he can't be tempted? Have you ever thought about that? Now think why he cannot be tempted. But why? He's got feeling. I'll tell you why he can't think. Come right back here. The only person that can be tempted is finite. You see, you can only have temptation when you don't know all the results of a choice you make. And you think it's more pleasurable on the long run to do something wrong than to do something right. Do you see that? Now, God cannot be tempted any more than you could intelligently blow your brains out happily and wholly. Because he knows the result of any selfish choice to the nth degree. He traces it all the way out to its absolute end. And he sees the end result of any sin at all is always hurt. Ultimately to himself. He sees it. Sees the hurt brought in the universe. So God, what is temptation to God? Somebody comes up to you and says, listen, man, I got a far-out thing you want to try. Get this loaded revolver, put it in your mouth, and pull the trigger. You'd say, is that a temptation? Well, you may be really depressed, and it may be a temptation, but it isn't for me. Now, God isn't tempted with sin. He's stupid. Why should he deliberately hurt himself? But he's the only being who cannot be tempted because he's the only infinite being. Once you get a finite being who doesn't know the results of every choice, he can be tempted. When Jesus walked the earth, you see, he didn't use any of his infinite knowledge. And that's obvious. Luke 2:52, Jesus increased in wisdom, see. And constantly Jesus, because he had to walk the earth as a person, he had to continually do what we have to do, ask our Father for help and all that. That's why his constant thrust to the Pharisees were, I always do the works of my Father. I'm not saying this of myself, but my Father who sent me gave me the words, and this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yeah, these two words are interchangeable, but the word in James says this, God does not tempt any man, and the context is with evil. God does not want to push a person into doing wrong. Do you see that? He will test a man's heart to see whether he will, make the right choice. But God doesn't say, listen, how would you like to do this? See, he's not like that. He's not a sneaky God. He doesn't come up and say, what about a little sin, just to see what I'd do? He doesn't do that. See? Yeah, this is this. That is actually the verse. He just read it from James. It goes like this. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, the thing here is this, and this is what we're talking about. In James, Jesus doesn't say it. In James, you get this thing. God will not put you, I'll tell you where Jesus does say it. It's in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation. That's one place where Jesus talks about temptation. But it's this thing. God does not present evil to you for you to do it. The devil will do that, see? The devil will say, listen, here's something, why don't you try this and see what God does? God never says that. God will test you to see whether you'll do what he wants you to do or whether you'll do what the devil wants you to do. But he will not lead you into doing wrong. That's not God's purpose. He's not malicious, see? He will test your responses. He will do that. But he will not tempt you in the sense of putting evil before you to do it. That's the bait. Matter of fact, a good paraphrase of lead us not into temptation would be this. Let no temptation find an answering chord of response in my heart. When I'm exposed to things, let none of those things find a chord of longing to do that in my own life. That's a better thing. Yes? Yeah. That's, again, see, there's so many weird things here that you, again, to understand it one little bit, you should read the whole thing. That's a basic thing. And when we say that, we say it in the context of all of this. In other words, to understand the word temptation, it's just a simple thing. It'll take you a while. Look up every word in the Bible concerning temptation. Every word in the Bible concerning temptation and that which is connected and what God says about it. When you've read all of those verses, then come back to the verse in question and then ask yourself, what does this mean? Now that's the only way I know to find out what the Bible really says. Not to read another book on what it's supposed to say, but to read the Bible itself. I have no commentaries on my library at all, not because I hate them, but because I'd rather read the whole thing first and find it for myself. I'd rather ask God, help me out. And if he doesn't want to show me, I'm not going to ask anybody else. Listen, the Lord wouldn't tell me this, so I wish you would. Now, I believe in teachers, man. I believe in teachers in the body of Christ. I do believe that. I believe we can save a lot of time by having guys organize and bring together various scriptural truths for us. But do you see? We should study for ourselves. Yeah. Well, not exactly. I didn't say that. I said prayer is a creative thing. And when you pray, you actually bring into being things. Now, I wouldn't say that God can't work without a basis. I'd say this. There are some things that it is unwise for God to do unless certain things take place. And he cannot do them and still be wise. He can't forgive a sinner until that man's willing to be repentant. See? That's a condition. Now, God has said, if you pray, I will do certain things. And that means this. Unless you do it, he's not going to do his thing. Not really. It's a matter, when you're dealing with moral choices, if it was a matter of force, if you're just using God's power, there'd be no problem at all. God would say, you do it and make you do it. But we're not talking about force. We're talking about freedom. We're talking about personality. We're talking about moral government, not force government. There's two ways to make you do something. One is to tie you up and carry you kicking and screaming down to the place where you're supposed to go. The other way is to show you the wisdom of going, to plead with you to go, and then to lay out the choice for you to go, and you decide to. Now, God could easily force the whole human race to obey him. But where's the love? And because there's real force and there's real freedom, and they're not, God cannot force a man to freely love him. That's because there are some real things that are true about God as opposed to some things that are not. That's a good question. And in the Bible, you won't find anybody ever praying that somebody will get saved. Isn't that a weird thing? In the Bible, you will never find a prayer that God will save somebody. Never. Jesus never prays, oh, Father, save these people, unless it's a physical deliverance. There's never a prayer that says this, oh, God, you do something that you don't want to do. All the prayers Jesus makes are this, send laborers forth into the harvest. See? When you see the fields white unto the harvest, pray ye the Lord of the harvest, that he will do his harvesting.
Well, why even not? Why doesn't God move? I mean, what is prayer? If God moves and he moves, what are our prayers to God?
They're all important, because it's like this. When you have real people who are really free and make real moral choices, then they become centers of creative wrong, if you want. Now, sin is a very creatively evil thing. Matter of fact, the worst of all sinners are brilliant. They're never caught. They're never stuck in prison. They're brilliant. They're geniuses, and they're vile. And the most sophisticated forms of sin are the most horrible forms. You know, the intellectual sinner who's using all the knowledge he has in the occult. This is the real rottenness of the occult. To tap areas of vast knowledge that are really filthy and use those powers. See? For personal gain, for pleasure, and all of this stuff. Now, when a sinner is sinned against God, he becomes a creative center, if you like, of rottenness. Now, there's only two ways God can deal with this man. He can plead with him and put on moral influences on him. They're moral drawings. He pleads with them. He calls them. And you'll see right through the Bible God pleading with people. Now, that's one way. The other way is to just step right in and judge him. One is a way of mercy. Mercy always appeals morally. Justice can use force. Now, God has a choice. He could step in and just use justice the first time a person steps out of line and blow him out of existence. Or he can go the mercy route. If he does that, the whole thing is based on the amount of moral light God can get through to a person. Now, God exercises as much moral light as he can through his universe, through his creation, through man's own conscience, and all of these things. But what God has called Christians to do is this, to increase the amount of available light on every sinner around by becoming a channel through which Jesus can manifest his power and his love and his direction and all of this. And that's the great prayer of John 17. The world will believe that you're real when people see that Christians love each other. So we become an additional moral power that God can use to turn people from sin to righteousness. In other words, what example does the sinner have of seeing a real loving person? He doesn't see it in the world. Everybody's selfish. They're ripping each other off even if they're nice. Now he sees some people who really love each other, who are genuinely unselfish, who are paying the price. Why are they like that, he says? Because the things that you know about God that you've shined on are actually true. That's why the Christian says. And he says, oh, that's extra light. Do you see the thing? It's not that the sinner doesn't have any light at all. It's that he's rejected all the light he has, and God increases the light by increasing the number of Christians. You know? That's why in revival, sometimes the power of God is so strong, people even coming into a city begin to get converted, even when there's no Christians around. The available amount of moral light is so strong and so powerful that it clears. There's a demonic factor, too. The devil hangs around, fooling everybody's head. When there's enough Christians around, he gets scared off. He clears out. Prayer, one of the main things prayer does is bind the power of Satan. That's what Jesus told us to pray for. Nobody takes a strong man's house unless he first ties a strong man up. And Corinthians tells us this, why is our gospel hid to them that are lost? If our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not. So what we do when we pray is this. We are preaching light, but we're praying that God will deliver these men's minds so they will have sight. That's a supernatural battle, see? That's why battles are won in prayer before they're won on the streets. You saturate a place in prayer, oh God, bind every satanic force, bind the mind, the blackness that's on these men's minds. So when I speak to them, it comes through with power, and they understand. That's what prayer is. Yeah? Yeah, because you've taken his book and you say, listen, Father, I didn't say this, you said it. And he said he's magnified his word above his name. So we take his book and we say, you promised that if I do this and that, then you will do this. And here I am. I've said to God often this. I've said, Lord, I didn't say this, you said it. The devil didn't say it, you said it. Wasn't my idea, it was your idea. And you said if I do this and this, you will do this. Now here I am, Father, in all honesty, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. Now it's your turn. And expect him to do it. Yes. Mm-hmm. My thing is this, we're not even talking about God's children yet. We're just talking about humanity in general. If God worked on strict justice, he'd wipe out the whole human race, including his children. See? Because we didn't come in on the score of justice, we come in on the score of mercy. What I'm saying is this, ever since the fall, God has not worked by strict justice. He has come mercy first, and then if all overtures of mercy have been cut off, and there's been no way for him to bring him back this way, He's had a shift to justice. They're both two facets of his personality, but we're going to show you in a little while that they're not two-headed gods. We'll come back to that, and we'll get into that in a little while. Modified, Dave. And this, the Bible says this. Here's a few scriptures. I'm just going to give them off the top of my head, because this is another thing. Right. Scripture says this. Write this statement down, brethren. I'm sorry to keep you so long on a very simple question and answer system. Write this down. Knowledge equals responsibility. Write it down. Think about it. Knowledge equals responsibility. That's one of the heaviest statements I know of in the Scriptures. I'll give you the Scriptures on which that statement is based in a little while. Knowledge equals responsibility. Here's a few of them. Let me find some verses for you if I can. I'll just give you them off the top of my head, and you can maybe look them up afterwards. 1. To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Jesus dying on the cross. I think that first one is in James. James, first one. Second one, Jesus dying on the cross, he says this, Father, forgive them. Why? For they know not what they do. I don't know where that is. Look that up. Right, James 4:17, first one. Next one, Acts 17. At times of ignorance, God winked at. But now, commands all men everywhere to repent. Here's another one. This is John 9:41, I think. If you were blind, you would have no sin. You couldn't really see. You'd have no sin. But now you say we see. And there's no obedience. There's no corresponding responsibility. Therefore your sin remaineth. In the book of Leviticus, there's a whole chapter just about given to what is called the sin of ignorance, or the sins of ignorance. And it's significant this. There is no penalty exacted on the person for committing a sin of ignorance, but an atonement is made for it. The person does not have to be punished for a sin of ignorance in the Old Testament. But there is an atonement. There is an atonement must be made for it, because it's a real wrong. Only it's made in ignorance. So no moral guilt is charged against the person, though a real wrong has been committed. So the Bible recognizes, even in sins of ignorance, no real moral guilt attached to them. You do something wrong, you don't understand that it was wrong, and God does not hold you guilty for it, but an atonement still must be made. Let me give you an example, David, of a sin of ignorance. Of a sin of ignorance? Or sin? Of what? Oh, the atonement. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Atonement is something to stand in the place of the penalty. That's the simplest. Something which is put in place of the penalty. In the old days, it was a lamb which was to be sacrificed, or a dove or something like that. And for Christ, it was the cross. We've come into the atonement. We just got started on groundwork here. You guys are up to the cross already, and you got off creation. Good heavens. All right? Here's a sin of ignorance. I'm coming over to California, and I'm driving down the road. In New Zealand, if they tell you, do not turn around here, you don't turn. You don't make it. You don't hang a U on any road that says do not turn. But you hang a U on any road that doesn't have any sign, and that's plain common sense to us in New Zealand, because we can't go on putting signs up all over the world. You are able to make a U-turn here. Of course, when I went to California, it was a little different. The very opposite is true. You cannot make a U-turn on any road unless it's posted that you can, which is very freaky. So I'm happily driving away from a conference with a bunch of Christians, and I find myself going on the wrong street, so I carefully wait in the street until all the traffic's gone, and then I turn around and I go down up the street that I just come, and a man with a cherry on top of his car pulls me over to the side and hands me a ticket to the policeman's ball. And I said, oh, what did it freaked me out. I don't know why. I thought maybe my tire had gone flat, or, I don't know what it was. I said, what are you wrong? He said, you made a U-turn. I said, right, just back up there. He said, right. You're not supposed to make a U-turn. I said, well, he said, did you see a sign that said you could? I said, no. I didn't see one that said I couldn't. See? Now, that's a sin of ignorance, but I should have known it, see. So what did I do? Did I say, I am innocent, I refuse to pay? I paid the fine, because I was really wrong. But I didn't say to God, oh, God, forgive me, I sinned again. You know, if I'd have known you weren't allowed to, you wouldn't have got me around to make a U-turn with wild horses. Do you see what I'm saying? That's a sin of ignorance. And the Bible is clear, though. Moral light is what God judges you by. And I'd say this, responsibility rejected equals guilt. Responsibility rejected equals guilt. So the reason why God is angry with people is first because he loves them, and second because they've rejected some real things they know that make them responsible. They're not willing to obey. I think it's Leviticus 17 or something like that. I'd have to look, Dave. It concerns sins of ignorance, and I'll just have to flash through it. But let me see. It's called the law of the something or other. No, it isn't Leviticus 17. Nor 18. I don't know. Somebody may find it. Okay, brethren, sistren. If anybody sees that chapter, it's there somewhere. Just show Dave read it. Oh, yes, Leviticus 5, sorry. Leviticus 5. Yeah, let's take a break and run around and breathe deeply and various other things. If you have other questions concerning this area, then ask me personally. All right? Got a break.